All right, good morning. See people starting to join us. Really excited to for this conversation today. Richard Enlow from Zapier is joining us, and it's a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, which is how do you bring humanity into business processes? So from post-its to pixels, how Zapier makes meaning in a paperless world. Welcome, Richard. So glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thank you to the audience. It's a pleasure being here, and so thankful for Mural and Imagine for having us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we're digging into this topic today, I think that we're all faced with these challenges of having a business that's got a business goal, needs to make
Mhm.
money, needs to earn revenue. These are things that help the company stay alive, and yet when you're in a kind of a product owner, product manager role, or a design role, or something where you're really trying to empathize with the customer, it can be hard to connect those two dots. And so I'm excited with what you're going to be sharing with us today. I, I'd,
Yeah.
I'd like to know just a little bit about overview, Zapier's use of Mural.
Yeah, I also want to echo what you're saying, which is I think this is so important because we do need to add that level of fidelity on top of these business decisions. And I think why it is so important to me and why it particularly hits home for me is because I'm a product manager now, but I spent the first half of my career actually as a product designer, actually doing research, conducting evaluative testing, working with users to actually make products better. So moving into the product manager role, realizing that, hey, we still need to add that level of human to what we do when we're thinking about a product process. So, I mean, you can see from the title here, we're saying this is about making meaning in a paperless world, but it is much more than that. It's it's specifically about adding fidelity to product decisions, but I think more so than that, it's about bringing the human element into decision making throughout every stage of the process. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about that, so we can get past the simple kind of dry business goals, like the objectives and the key results, and we can actually have something that's more meaningful here.
That's right. And I think so many of us are now, we're winding up what has been an incredible year. What a roller coaster
Yeah,
of a year this has been, right? And so
yeah,
we're finding ourselves embracing these year-end patterns and thinking about what could we do in the next year. So I think the timing is really good for a lot of teams that are struggling with um, now that we've kind of made sense out of some of the turmoil over the last year. How can we get our footing again and really ground ourselves in excellent experience and finding ways to connect business goals that have shifted in all sorts of ways for businesses,
yeah.
and trying to draw this connection between the two of them.
Totally, especially as many of us are trying to build that kind of remote muscle. I just how Zapier is using Mural, I think, is really interesting. Zapier has been an all remote company since our inception. So since 2011, we never had an office. So this kind of work that we're talking about and using digital tools and to be able to collaborate and share between mediums, I think that's where Mural kind of really made sense. Like I come from the consulting world and I was wondering like how do we get all of these like physical elements of post-its and insights and all of this kind of working activity and sketching, how do we do that when working in a remote company? And Mural was one of the tools that Zapier was using to do that. So as soon as I got into Zapier and saw all of the teams actually using this kind of digital whiteboard, digital kind of like sticky that we use Mural at, I realized like, oh, there is a way for us to be able to do whiteboarding or sticky notes through this digital medium. It's quite surprising. I recently went into our whole company mural board just to take a look across all the teams what people are using it for. There's people in security trying to plan out processes there. It's used very heavily by our product management group. which I'm part of. It's used very heavily by our UX research org and by our design team. I don't think there's not a team at Zapier that does not touch the Mural boards in one way or another. So we found it to be a really helpful remote tool for doing the kind of things that I was used to in my physical consulting work.
That's fantastic. Well, I knew in my past, I always felt like I was never quite making the best use out of researchers that I had on my teams or at my disposal. And one of the things that I really appreciated when we started using virtual tool Mural at Autodesk before I joined here is that the work that they were doing, the synthesis and the artifacts that they were collecting from the users were these digital notes that we were isolated from the paper notes, which might have happened at a conference in Vegas or somewhere else, and those notes are gone and the synthesis has happened. Well, now those notes actually persist, and it felt like you could get your hands on the voice of the customer, even though you weren't the one that wrote that note. Those notes and that sentiment is still alive. So
yeah, it's there for perpetuity. And what I laugh at myself thinking back about the days when I was at IDEO before I joined Zapier, and we would make a ritual at the end of every project. We would literally have like at least 10 foam boards filled with Post-its, and our ritual was to just go through and get them all off of the boards. I'm like, oh my gosh, those are important insights. I wish we had those. Right. So now we have those. Mural allows us to keep that. So yeah, it's even going to be more helpful long after any of this kind of like research study or prioritization happens, because it's there. Yeah.
That's right. Facilitating workshops, we used to have a little inside joke as a facilitator where we'd let everyone know all of your hard work all over the walls. We send them to a beautiful farm where they go live upstate, and then
totally.
as soon as they leave the room, it's all just, where's the recycling bin, and you.
So. Yeah, hopefully months later, people don't ask like, hey, what happened to that group of stickies that we had?
I have a photo on my phone now. Those days are over. So great. Well, I want to get back to this thread of, making business objectives human. Because I think that's something I really enjoyed listening about your approach at Zapier and what you're doing. So there's a tension, right, between what the business needs to succeed and the voice of the customer. How do you bridge that?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's all about making business objective human, just like this slide says, because there's typically what we might see. I'll tell you from my perspective. On my team right now, my team's KR is simply focused on revenue increase, right? Increase revenue over a time period, and that's measured by annual recurring revenue. But that's a pretty dry, kind of big, high level topic. Like, what does that actually mean? I mean, that's an example of a dry one. I can give you some really quick examples of some other ones that were interesting in the past. I worked with Harley Davidson, and they had a really fun one that I really want to point out. Their business objective was to get more butts on bikes, which one of my favorite business objectives. But again, what does that mean? Like, how do we do that? Why are there not enough butts on bikes? Right.
Their business.
So exactly. But yeah, let me bring you back to our current KR. So we have a KR on our team right now of revenue increase in 2021 to end at December 15th. And that's going to be measured by annual recurring revenue. Very dry. More money as measured by the amount of money people are paying every year over the course of a year. While it's a very valid goal, it's also it is devoid of human elements. What does that actually mean? What are the opportunities that would drive the success of the goal, right? It's not included in there. We need to figure that out ourselves as a product management team or as a product team. And that often leaves us with more questions than answers. So our first step that we're going out is like, okay, we have a business objective. What is the full story here? We need to get a full story of what this objective actually means. So I might ask questions like, why do users upgrade today? That's a part of the story that we're talking about. So what is the conversion moment about? What keeps users who try Zapier and free users who use Zapier but don't pay, what keeps them from upgrading? That's another human element that we need to understand a little bit, like hiring and firing of Zapier. What is the purchasing process even like for these folks?
Right.
And why do some users ultimately leave Zapier? All of those pieces are just examples that present a fuller story that allows us to play into this kind of bigger KR of revenue increase, more ARR. So I think that's where we could probably start jumping shortly. I don't know if this is time now to kind of talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And I see in from my notes from our previous discussion and a question that just came up. The question was, is it really about making them human or making them actionable? And I think it's both. Right?
Yeah.
You want them to be actionable in the service of the customer, but understanding, there's lots of activity you could just do, but it's much more important to ask the right framing questions and make sure you know what actions would actually move the needle on the user behavior, improve the
Totally.
experience. So
And I think what's really important, the important distinction here is that it's actionable, but it's also actionable because we have a level of fidelity that sits on top of that kind of KR. We have a KR. We want to go get the full story. We're now adding a level of fidelity based on user insights or research or data insights. And by the time we get to actionable, we have that full story in place, so we can actually ensure that the decisions that we're making are the right decisions for both our company and for both our users.
that's right. Well, I want to, you have a very specific set of words you use to talk about the template we're going to look at.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say a little bit about, you call it discovery and shaping. And so I want to
Yes.
know, say a little bit about that. That was new to me and I loved your explanation.
Yeah, and this is really what this process, the process that we're going to go over today encompasses a lot of what discovery and shaping is. So discovery and shaping is, discovery is very much trying to go wide as possible, like trying to learn as much as possible, talking to experts, that could be talking to developers to understand constraints, that could be talking to business leaders internally to understand really what's motivating this decision to drive for this particular KR or this particular objective. So that's kind of the front-loaded process to really understand what's going on, right? What's going on from the business perspective and what's going on from the customer perspective. And then shaping is really where those things start to merge together. So, okay, we found out a lot of things from the business perspective, from the customer's perspective. Now we're going to start honing on the things that are more important. We're going to be going over a little bit later some examples of affinity diagramming, and shaping could mean like, hey, we have a high frequency of users who are talking about this particular pain, and that might help us to prioritize like, okay, when we're shaping this, meaning like out of the multitude of things we could be doing, shaping means like, hey, we should be working on these 5. Like here are the high priority things. And then once we have that prioritization in place, like how are we going to do it? Well, that's also part of shaping. Well, we know customers like to purchase via invoice, so how do we make a better invoice? How can we remove the friction from opening an upgrade modal? Those are 2 examples of shaping that are driven by some of these pains that we have prioritized previously.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love the point you made also. Sometimes by the time the action trickles down to, us mere mortals trying to make a difference in the experience, the business objectives have sometimes been set months or years in advance. So there's this temporal disconnect between the steering that's trying to happen at an executive level and how does that actually trickle down into day-to-day actions, week to week, velocity and agile teams and all this stuff.
Totally, and those are disparate groups, right? We have our business leaders, our business executives, and then we have the team at the ground level. So we'll get into next steps too, next actions. But one way I think that this closes the loop is that we can then start feeding this fidelity, this human element, back to those business owners, so that they can use that information to color future decisions or future objective creation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at the template. So I wanted to back up and just have us look end to end. So this is a lot of data. I'm guessing that things typically work from left to right. The same as the case here for this template.
Yeah, this is a lot of data, but this actually represents it represents different moments in time, different activities in time. So we would never see this actually on one mural board. It would actually evolve. So we'll get into it, but this raw data section that you can see over here, it will morph into what we would call an affinity map, which would then morph into what we call our insight creation process. We'll walk through all of this, but yeah, this is, it might seem overwhelming because it's a lot, but it's actually transitioning data over time.
Cool. Well, let's start at the beginning. Just I'll be your cameraman. Walk us through this this template and tell us how it's used.
Yeah, well, let's zoom in on business objective a little bit here. So the business objective is something that we've talked about a little bit at the jump. You can see here that increased annual recurring revenue is very much one of our business objectives that we currently have as a team. So this is a pretty good example of objective we might have. If it were more specific, we would have a number associated with this: increase annual revenue by recurring revenue by what number, by what date. But typically that's going to be like a business objective that is going to be common within the community that's probably on this call. But again, like I said, that is just one point in one piece of data, very high level. And by the time it hits our team, so we can go down to the second section below, we're essentially just wanting to find out the full story. So part of the full story is really just to be able to create some learning goals. So, okay, if our business objective is around KR, if our business KR is around more annual recurring revenue, what does that mean when it comes to customers? That's understanding our current purchasing process. That would be a good important piece of information that would color that objective that we have. Understanding what drives users to upgrade today, another very important goal. But everybody's going to have a different set of learning goals, a different set of objectives. Going back to the Harley-Davidson situation, we can ask ourselves, it's like, how do people ride bikes today? Why do people purchase their bikes? Some of those kind of like, what is the motivation for purchasing a bike? What are their dreams around purchasing a bike? There's this vision of what a Harley can enable them to do. So it's going to be different for every single person, but important to start with a KR, outlining some learning goals, and then using that as a template for the full story.
Where do these learning goals in particular, like who's driving the generation of these in
It's actually done in Mural as well. We sit down with our UX research team. We sit down with our team itself. We will sometimes sit down with a data scientist. And it's really this kind of like brain trust of all of us coming together and asking questions. Really, that's what it is. Like, and a lot of these questions that you see in front of you are from a brain trust of people just curious about like, hey, what is keeping people from upgrading, downgrading, leaving? There's a multitude of different learning goals we might have. And then within that same team, we might even focus more strictly on some learning goals. Like we might have a data scientist saying like, hey, conversion is really important right now. We're seeing a drop off of conversion. Can we learn a little bit more about that? Can that be one way forward?
That's wonderful. So they're even visual discussions happening in other murals that are kind of sub discussions that trickle up into this discussion, right? So,
Totally.
yeah,
Totally. It is a patchwork of framework of using digital tools like Mural to make decisions and then drive things like the ones that we're talking today around affinity mapping.
wonderful.
But so yeah, so on my team, this set of learning goals is the first step to a research plan with the help of UX research to collect data that will soon add meaning to our decision making. So oftentimes so I'll fast forward just a little bit.
Right.
So we fast forwarded, we created we started with our learning goals made from our key objectives. We've created a research plan. We've created a discussion guide. So what are the questions we want to ask customers that get to the heart of some of these learning goals? And then here we get into, and then we actually talk to a variety of users, and that's where the raw data is actually in front of you. We have a lot of data.
How much time might lapse between we're clear on our learning goals and when the time the raw data comes in?
It really depends on the kind of user study that you're conducting. We have projects that we can start defining learning goals on Monday and start recruiting by the end of the week and talking to users either that week or the next. But I can tell you another example of we had another recent study where we spoke with users who had left Zapier, right? They left Zapier and they used another tool, or they just stopped using an automation tool in general. Those folks were a little bit harder to find. Finding somebody who left and say, hey, we want to talk to you. They're like, why? That was a bit of a challenge. That study actually took 2 months to track down all those users. So that was rough. But yeah, it just changes depending on the team.
Cool. So you're using colors really, really intentionally here.
Yeah, colors are really important to us in any of these tools, and that's why Mural is also pretty awesome, because Post-its only come in so many colors. Then you have to start getting into the world editions and stuff like that. But yeah, so colors are very intentional. Each one of these colors represent a particular user that we spoke with. So you can see here the name, role, and the company, and then pretty much everything below is all of the rough data about that user. So there's a lot of data here. So in this particular study, this accounts for 8 different users. And now we have to ask ourselves, like, what do we do here? We have a lot of data. How do we make meaning out of this? So for us, the next step is to start finding patterns and frequency among this data. So we're trying to find patterns by finding Post-its across the colors that represent similar ideas. So you can start to see that a little bit here. And the other thing is you're looking for frequency, right? So if you go to, Mark, if you go to how they use Zapier, just this one here.
Okay.
Yep. You can see frequency is a visual thing, right? So if we know that every single color represents a specific user, so if we see a rainbow of colors as we see in this particular category, we know, like, hey, this is pretty hot. This is a category that a lot of folks are talking about. This is a very high level category. This is specific use cases. As we start breaking those down into smaller categories like lead management, sales, advertising, then we can start breaking that down into subcategories. But yeah, so frequency via colors, and then patterns via the grouping. But if I can show you one really cool trick that we use, is we can actually use search in Mural. So if we go to raw data.
All right.
The left one all the way over there. Yeah, this one right here. This could be quite cumbersome. But let's say that I'm curious about how Zapier works on a team. I would actually type in that string. So now I have a much smaller set of particular post-its to actually work with, right? So I'll go through here and I'll say like, okay, this one's talking about how somebody is using it on a team. Okay, team, great. I have a category here. I might pull up the next particular insight. So how about company? How's it being used within a company? So if we try company, let's see if that pulls up anything.
It's my digital arm extension. They're like, see, look at me type company.
So as you can see, this is not something that you can do in Post-its, just so you know. This was actually quite a pain having to go through the 10 foam core boards that I was talking about earlier. This makes it a lot easier. So let's move on to the actual start, so we can clear out that search. So now if we go over to the right, we have this raw data. It's now, we're massaging it, we're now putting it into different categories. So that's what you see here on the right. Now it's a lot easier to kind of dig into specific information. So here, this is an important one. Like many people, people struggle to find the right plan. So we have some insights here from folks who are struggling to find the right plan. It looks like less than half of the users that we spoke with talked about that. So the lower frequency, but still important. But this might be an actual pain. Another trick that we often use is we use stickering within Mural. So stickers can be found. We currently make our own custom stickers. I believe they're on the board here.
Oh yeah. You've got a key, right? That you've
Yeah.
Here we go.
So we might start using stickers around pains. You know, things that really want to call our attention. Like, hey, this is particularly painful. Highlighting loves, things that we should keep the same or that we can work off of and build off of. Workarounds are always important whenever we're having these kind of customer conversations to find out it's actually like, hey, this pain was so apparent that they started to create a workaround for it. So highlighting those post-its are important because there might be an opportunity there. And last are the frequencies of requests that we get about a particular problematic part of this process. So
I was just going to say that's another wonderful aspect of working visually, and teams divining and settling on their own visual vernacular, right? And
yeah.
So these icons now for your teams almost have a visceral reaction to pains and loves and things. They get happy when they see lots of hearts and
totally.
So you build that visual vocabulary, and it allows you to continually parse and reparse and see patterns in that overwhelming amount of data, and keep track of kind of the team sentiment around the trends and things that they're seeing. As opposed to a passive. I had so many passive readouts from research that was done. I didn't hear any of the original data. I didn't see any original notes. I just see a PowerPoint of findings. And there's something very different from that and being guided through the raw material and the synthesis and being able to almost repartake in the sense-making journey with the researchers. They have the context. It all comes back into their mind like, oh, right, we had this big discussion around these two things, and here's why we settled on them being like this. And then, anyway, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is actually really interesting, Mark, because you take this raw data, these customer conversations, and what you end up doing is you're like Neo staring into this matrix. Like all of those post-its now start to have meaning, right? So if you shift over, so we use stickers to do the highlights, but then you start seeing all of these connections being made. Okay, I think an important one is toward the bottom. Yeah, this one down here, this need for speed. Yeah, so I mean, once you start categorizing some of these insights that are starting to emerge, or these categories that are starting to emerge, or you can see here, building takes valuable engineering time and resources that aren't always available. And we're like, okay, well, that's actually being driven by this need for speed. This connects to this very directly. So we can know like, okay, what is the outcome the user wants to have? What are the constraints, or what are some of the roadblocks that a user has in place? Right there, there's an opportunity where we might be able to add value. So something that's very problematic that is part of a goal, like what can we do there?
Wonderful. Is now I want to make sure we touch all the surface area before we come back up to a high level, but you have some insights, right? So it's not just enough to go, oh, here's some patterns. Look at these interesting patterns.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally right. So we had this learning goal. We had a bunch of data. We started to group that data to find frequency, right? So now we have some good idea of frequency and pattern. But the last part is the most important part, right? And this is the boiling up of the insights. So I've actually gave some examples here. Let me see. So this is essentially an evolution of what we just saw earlier. But in this particular case, what we're doing is we're adding these longer post-its that summarize the information that we just learned, right? So in this particular case, how do you hear about Zapier? The people with the most success know about Zapier through a known channel, previous jobs, people in their life, courses they're taking. That's a pretty important channel for us to take advantage of that. So how can we activate more users to kind of have a helping hand? Might be one way, might be one thing that we might want to explore. What does that mean? I'm solutioning here, but that could be like an affiliate program. That could be partnering up with content creators. That could be friends and family discount. Like I'm just jumping off in solution territory here. But when you see as a frequency like this with all of these colors, we're understanding like, okay, the people who are successful who have had help, like how do we provide more help? We can even do it in app. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love I'm just curious, how many iterations would you say are behind the current state of the way you're using this flow, right? So did you have most of this nailed after the first time, or did it take a couple passes to get to this level of intention with the colors, icons, pattern finding?
Um, it's become pretty common. I wouldn't be surprised if other people are already doing this right now with Mural.
Yeah.
But we take typically 3 passes. We turn raw notes into post-its. So that's that first raw data step. Again, Mural is cool because I could just copy and paste all my notes in, and it makes a post-it for each insight. That's awesome because you're not having to copy and paste. So that's first pass. Second pass is rough categorization, right? That's going to be where you have the categories around like use cases or considerations to buy, right? That's our first kind of gut check pass. And that's where we're using the search function to kind of just do that really rough kind of sorting. And then the last pass, this one's the heavy one. Yeah. This one is breaking down those rough categories into even smaller categories, and then actually sitting in a virtual room with a UX researcher, with myself, with other people on the team, and just examining what does this mean? Like, how do we interpret this insight? And just also checking each other's bias. Like we're not jumping into a solution mode. That we're actually boiling this up to an actual insight that we can work with. But yeah, after 3 passes, it's a simple 3-step process. It takes a long time.
But so much work. I mean, this is where I know people want to shortcut through this, and yet it is foundational to all the other machine you're going to put into motion to make stuff happen within your company to try and hit those revenue goals. This is framing it. This is really understanding it. This is making sure it's impactful.
Yeah. I mean, if we go to next steps, I can give you just a couple examples of some of the things that could emerge out of this type of work. And these are just variables, but things to do, like, next steps, things that we could be doing, that's really important. but also things that we should not be doing. Right? This is a good way for us to say like, hey, if we want to increase revenue, we shouldn't be throwing up an ad in front of people or sending them multiple emails about sales and whatnot. That is an anti-pattern that we have, and we learned that from some of this research. Requests to consider. So if we're hearing a lot of requests, that's a good point right now to say like, hey, we're hearing about this in the course of the study around ARR. Should we be doing something about this here? Or we can actually share it with another team, right? Like, hey, we learned about this thing in the purchasing process, and we think that it would benefit your team. One really interesting one recently was when we talked with some of our highest value users, and we realized like, hey, we need to communicate more effectively to them. Like the problems that they're having on the ground and the way that they work are different from our typical like small and medium-sized business users who we are focused on messaging. So some of these insights actually went into a 5-part series about this new customer type that is being used by marketing and our support org to really understand these customers and help support them better and talk to them better.
That's wonderful. I know I've had that experience as well, where some research will land on my lap and it's so serendipitous. I had this question and suddenly someone else has actually done the hard work of finding these rare unicorn customers that you're trying to talk to and have talked with them and have some insights. And how often these insights just get lost, or they end up being something that only influences part of the the experience, as opposed to being something generally shared, or a new level of understanding and empathy with like you said, a new emergent customer type.
Yeah. And it's amazing because it's like after you've done this work, the next step is the things that I'm talking about. Like, but how do you share that work? I think this is where it's interesting, because through this whole process, we now boiled out these insights, which are easily shareable, right? But then we can link off to this Mural board that has all the fidelity around like, okay, what did that actually mean? Okay.
That's right.
So, and I do want to say, like, if you haven't done this type of work in the past, or if you haven't done it in a while, it is so much fun, because when you find that eureka moment and you find that little gem of insight that you haven't heard before, or something that like, oh, that's the answer, and it just hits you over the head, there's a bit of a rush. So highly recommended.
That's right. And it's in the service of removing a pain point from another human being.
Exactly.
You're like,
Yeah.
that doesn't feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And
Well,
working toward that business objective that we have been focusing on since the very beginning here, right? But
that's
now we
right.
have a validated human way that we can get this done.
That's right. That's right. Well, wonderful. Thank you for jumping through that. I know we're going to. I want to kind of sum this up at a high level, but I want to do another reach out to the audience. If you have questions, please use the Q&A panel in Zoom and register them there so we can keep track of them. And we'll have some time at the end to go through those questions. All right. So, at a really high level, there's some interesting ways in which you kind of summed up when we were talking. We're like, what's when you really back up? What are the amazing impacts or outcomes, or how do you think about this at a high level? And you kind of you landed on these 3 things, and I want you to unpack them a little bit for us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, these are some of the takeaways from this whole process that we've been talking about. So the full story is representative of just realizing that, hey, there is more that we could learn here, right? If you have an objective, a KR, ask yourselves, what else should I know? Like, what are my learning goals? How can I get this full story? So full story is very important because it drives decisions. It makes a problem much more personable, so relatable. And and then you can also share that full story at the end so that other people can also feel the things that you have learned about through this journey.
And quite literally, like, stories are just such an efficient way to transfer more than just data, right? You can get that emotional you can convey so much more and enlist people in helping solve a problem within the company if you can literally tell stories from the point of view of the customer, as opposed to it being an abstract, human cognitive science would dictate that you should not put too many variables in front of people and whatever. You're like, yeah, but this is this person trying to do this thing in this moment, and they did it because this was available in the product.
Totally, totally. And it makes it way more digestible if you're pulling out this, 20 plus pages of notes and just saying like, here's what's digestible, here's what's important. These are things that are actionable and helpful. Yeah. And again, the fidelity to the decision. Now we can, when we decide to do something in relation to this KR, we now have the data to back up that decision. And this is really important, that oftentimes we will go back directly to the customer quote, right? If we're working on a particular feature that we think is important, that plays into our KR, and an executive says like, oh, why is this important? We can actually go back and we can read customer quotes. We can point to the Mural board and hear it directly from their mouths. And that really resonates with them to hear it from customers.
That's right.
So
The confidence of your decisions is so important, and it's possible because you can trace it right back to the voice of the customer.
definitely, definitely. And also, and we were talking about this before, it now lives forever, right? So if I had questions about research or some work that they did a few years back, I can go into Mural and I can see that board and I could get that fidelity for myself as well. So yeah. So yeah, fidelity not only for our stakeholders, but for our team, and for the shaping that we do to actually build the thing, right? And then last is clear next steps. I think in summary, this is what this is all about. Like we want to have clear next steps on things that we should be doing that make a difference, right? That actually solve a problem, that help play into the business objective. And we can do this all together once we have got this full story. We added this fidelity. Now we're very confident to know what to do next.
That's wonderful. Well, when as I was learning about your process and what you're doing, the thing that I really love is the fact that part of your culture, it's not just about trying to fit the human aspect into the business goals and everything. You actually like taking time to be human is a core value for your team.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is super important, especially when working at a remote company where you don't have those kind of water cooler moments to kind of have those human time. So one of our working agreements as a team is to take time to be human. And I thought this would be fun. I was talking to the Mural folks, as we actually use Mural for that too. We have a couple of different things that we do, but one of the things that we love doing whenever we're working with a new person or starting a new project is this activity called a sticky bio. There we are, sticky bio. And it is the simplest thing you guys will ever do. I mean, seriously, you take 10 stickies, give everyone a color, give 10 stickies and give them some time. And essentially what people do is they use the constraint of 10 stickies to write a chronology of their life, the moments in their life that they want to talk about, right? Whatever moment they could be. I met my partner, I got married, I bought a home, had my first child, went to the school. It's a super kind of speed dating way to really understand a person's background in like a really low fidelity way. So here's some examples here. And it's just fun. And oftentimes we will do this at a retreat as a bigger product team. Everyone's sitting like crisscross applesauce on the ground and around a whiteboard as we do this. But then when we're back at home, we do the same thing in Mural. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, I think yours is on here, right? So
yeah,
I don't know if this is fictitious or not, but
no, this is actually right. Yeah. So this is my posted bio. I grew up in a town of 2,500 people, so that's a very, very small town. I was indoors a lot with bulletin boards bulletin board systems and basics. I was kind of a nerd and liked to work on computers when I was a little kid. And then I felt like I was an outsider looking for a place in the world. You know, when you're in a small town, you're like, where do I go? What do I do? So I went to school, design school, and studied multimedia design, which is digital design and graphic design. I got my first job in design that became an empire. I wrote this a long time ago. It just meant that I became like the first design hire at a place that turned into like a 10 design hire kind of place.
Wow.
So did that for about 4 years, and then it still was in a small town, so I felt stuck. So I decided to get unstuck, and I moved to the city of Beijing with 21.5 million people. So
Big difference.
sharp contrast. I lived there for a long time and moved back to the US, long layover in San Francisco, and never left, became a UX designer in San Francisco. Met my partner. We've been together for 8 years. For the past half of my career, I spent in consultancies. And then recently, probably almost 2 years ago, Zapier moved me down to Palm Springs, and I got to work all remote in a beautiful, place where people go on vacation. So
Absolutely.
It's super cool.
You have some of the most amazing mid-century modern homes out there in Palm Springs. They're just
Yeah, definitely. So as you can see, just in that little small moment, you can get to know me a little bit, right?
absolutely. And that psychological safety and that team building is so important to all the work, right? It just
Yes.
manifests in the safety you feel to challenge, in the affinity clustering and all the other methods that you
Mhm.
use. If you have this foundation of mutual appreciation and respect and trust, then there's actually more dynamic, more honest discussion that permeates
Totally.
up absolutely directly to the experience the customers have.
Yeah, Mark, it's really made a difference in our product work and also at the team level, just the way that we work with each other.
I've-
So yeah, I highly recommend look for ways to add a level of human in everything you do, the team level and at the product level. And here's just one example using affinity mapping. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's. I want to just briefly touch on kind of what's when you look ahead. What are some of the things that you see coming next? Could be about the use of Mural. Could be about synthesis and the role of research in product experience. What are some of the things that you're thinking in 2021 are going to be your focus?
Yeah. We are going to continue. I am operating as a team and using tools like Mural, among other ones that are starting to pop up. It is really a great time to be a cloud-based software company. So yeah, I'm enjoying to join these ways that we're starting to collaborate differently and in better ways. Um, to give you an example from Mural, which I think is fun, is that just recently I found in Mural there is a private mode,
Right.
and that has been so helpful. So one of the things that I found, that I and the team has found, is that there's a sense of bias when you can see how people are voting on things, right? So or what people are writing, right? So the private mode has been a really good way for us to have this kind of like solitaire in front of us where we can kind of like empty our minds, or we can vote and not be biased by any other team member on the team. And then as soon as we turn it off, there's a bit of a surprise, like, oh no, I said the same exact thing. And in which case it becomes really interesting. And it's like, okay, there's some frequency of these ideas that are coming out too.
That's right.
That's interesting. How can we pay attention to that?
That's right.
So yeah,
It adds contrast and like a crispness to the authenticity of
oh yeah,
individual contribution. But yeah,
totally. And this is why I kind of dislike voting in person using dot votes, because you are a kingmaker at that point. You're like, I don't want to vote on the thing that has too many dots. I'll vote on this one. It doesn't have any dots. So I think the private mode is going to be a bit of a game changer for our team to just like not add bias and to hopefully elicit some really deep down ideas or insights. I'm excited about that.
wonderful. Well, we look forward to checking back with you, in the future at some point and say like, what are the things that you've learned about some of the new features in private mode and breakthrough?
Totally.
I think we have some questions, so I think we'll move over to some of these. Let's start with I'll go from upper left and work our way down. So from our friend Shane Smart, what's the guiding question that you ask for defining and learning goals? So is there some kind of rubric or mantra that you have when you're setting your learning goals?
Yeah. Shane, I usually start with, I'll start a mural, or if you're in person, start in person with either Post-its or stickies, whatever that may be. And essentially, I ask the following question: what do we need to know to be successful here? What are the things that we should know about this particular topic that we need to be successful here? So in the case of the Harley Davidson's butts on bikes situation, it was essentially like, are people riding with each other? Like, is there a community aspect here? Like, how many rides do people even have? I mean, you are often coming in with a new topic that you don't know anything about. So the learning goals is essentially like, hey, what is the baseline that I need to start understanding? And that might prompt new questions, right? So how often are they riding their bike might be one question, but what is keeping them from riding the bike might be another question. What would make them want to, what would help people to ride their bikes more? That's another question. So essentially it's a chain of different topics that you want to learn about, all to help you really define this whole area. Remember the full story part, right?
Right.
If you want to get the full story, what are the things that you have to cover? So I would say start there.
Got it. So basically, be curious, generate a ton of questions, and then from that, you almost do another distillation, dedupe,
Yeah,
you know. Um,
totally,
yeah.
totally. And what's the area that we need to really press on? Because remember, the learning goal is what drives the discussion guide. So if you can be clear about the areas that you want to cover via the learning goals, then you'll have a much more directed discussion guide and much better insights.
Wonderful. Um, we have a question from Tom about, do you ever form hypotheses at the beginning of research? Or do you allow kind of emergent conversation and discovery along the way?
Yeah, form hypotheses at the beginning. We do form hypotheses at the beginning of the research, but then we add but oftentimes it's the reverse, which is their insight is driving the hypothesis.
Right.
So I'll give you an example of when it often happens at the beginning of research, and that's usually on a quantitative, we'll get a quantitative insight from one of our data scientists who says like, hey, we're seeing some really strange behavior around people who have an account after 21 days, right? So that's an insight that we could probably hypothesize and then go out and learn from. But oftentimes the exploratory research is about us finding insights to form a hypothesis around.
Got it. Okay. There's a question from Yusuf about how you actually present these results. Are you presenting directly from Mural? Is there a further distillation, a roll up for executive, or how do you present for people that weren't part of the process?
Yeah, it really depends on how you guys communicate internally within your own companies. At our company at Zapier, we have an internal blogging tool called Async. And the way that we are presenting our research is we're writing a blog post that breaks down all of the insights, it adds customer quotes, and then we link off to the Mural board. So think internally about like, how does your company communicate with one another, and use that channel. And if you don't have that channel, it might be useful to think about like, okay, how do people want to be communicated to? Do they want a PowerPoint presentation? It's really dependent on your organization.
Cool. I'm gonna bundle up three other questions that are really about the process, right? So one is, how are you actually conducting interviews? Can you allow text-based input, or do they have to be verbal and recorded in transcription? And logistically, how are you setting this all up? Are the interview, are people actually touching the mural, or is the mural really your team only capturing and distilling there? Describe that process. How are the interviews conducted, and how's that information captured into the mural?
Yeah. So we use the interviews happen over the course of a few weeks, so 1 to 2 weeks, and we will use a capture device that is either like Excel, or we'll use, we recently used Airtable. And essentially, we'll take raw notes during the session. So I or another person might play the interviewer, and then we'll have someone taking notes actually in Excel or in Airtable. Of course, we record the interviews just to kind of go back to the tape to clarify anything or to pull it out. But yeah, raw notes in Excel or raw notes in Airtable. And that's where you can just copy and paste and throw it into Mural, and it makes a new post-it for each one. So whatever way you do it, make it easy. I would make it easy to be processed by Mural if you're deciding to use Mural for infinity mapping.
And do you ever conduct nonverbal interviews, like text-based or form-based, a long form response to specific questions asynchronously? Is that ever something you do?
No, we don't. We don't do any kind of like virtual kind of interviews in that way. But we do things like we'll periodically have like a product survey, something like that, that we collect a lot of data in mass, or yeah, typically it's one-on-one. We like to probe a little bit deeper when users are answering questions, and that's a lot more. That's helped by being on the same call.
We have a couple questions that are also touching on the use of Mural by your team. Is
Yeah.
it something that is broadly embraced? Is there any kind of, what type of onboarding do you do? If someone were to join your team next week, how would you orient them to the way your team is leveraging Mural?
Yeah, we actually so we use a lot of cloud-based tools. So we have a single repository, Coda, which talks all about our onboarding process. And part of that onboarding process talks about our Mural board, our Mural room. So a new person can walk in and they can read a lot of these like affinity mapping exercises or any of the prioritization exercises that you've seen before, or read our sticky bios. But it's really easy to introduce a new team member to Mural because everyone has access to Mural, essentially. I am the person with the login, but anonymous cacti or anonymous squirrel will come in, and that's that new person, and it just makes it really easy to use. Typically, when a new person jumps into our organization, we'll start with a pre-flight. So we'll actually use Mural as a way to say, like, what is your goals? What do you hope to accomplish on this team? Like, what are you worried about? That's another way we add human into this conversation. It also teaches them to get comfortable with Mural.
Wonderful. Well, Richard, it's been a pure delight meeting with you in advance, preparing for this session, and then walking through all this and sharing it. We really we grow ourselves and learn so much by, and having folks on like you who are so willing to share their experiences and learnings as we're all trying to figure out new ways of leveraging these new ways of working. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, and thank you guys. I really appreciate it. We love Mural. Like I said, everyone uses it. So I jumped at the chance to be able to talk about how we use it here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, before everyone hops off, I wanted to say a little bit about what's coming up next. So we have the team from Emerson is going to be doing a talk on making shift happen with collaborative design and development. So Christina Kofsky, human-centered design engineer and part of Emerson's Human-Centered Design Institute, they're going to share how she and the Human-Centered Design Institute team have adapted to the challenges this last year that we all know. 2020 has been quite a roller coaster year. and how there's scaling in-person work, which we're familiar with Emerson, and they also are a heavy user of Luma as well. So lots of design thinking culture as well. Interesting. So make sure you register for the entire season at Mural/Emerson. And in the next couple of days, I'm pleased to say that we'll be sending out a recap of this session, including a link to Zapier's Discovery and Shaping Insights template. And maybe we can persuade Richard to give us a version of the template he has for the sticky bio, which is an awesome, fun thing. That's great. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you all.